All right, I'll go ahead and call, I don't know, this is Sarah's, but I'll use it right now, this committee meeting to order for the Housing Planning and Development Committee. Don't have the agenda in front of me, but I think we only have two items, one of which is the approval of last week's meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the Housing Planning and Development Committee meeting minutes?
So moved.
All right, Sarah, second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The next thing is ordinance 38, 2024, an ordinance to amend section 10502 of the zoning code to change the zoning map to allow a planned development at Donald and Thoreau. So I know we had pretty robust discussion last meeting, went over a little bit on our time. Thank you, Council President, for allowing that to happen. And some of the committee members wanted a little bit more time to consider the proposal, ask questions, think about it. We did get many emails over the weekend that, you know, from residents near and around Donald and Thoreau and Merle, expressing some opposition, all the emails were in opposition to this particular plan unit development for varying reasons. But I guess I wanted to, I made my thoughts clear last week on the record that, you know, this isn't a perfect site plan, but, you know, on council, we appoint folks to our boards and commissions to review these things. From what I could see and following it through Planning Commission and ABR through the summer, the administration, the commissions, the neighbors all had comments that were incorporated somewhat into this site plan. Obviously, not everyone got what they want. I'm sure the developer didn't get everything that they wanted. I'm sure the Planning Commission and ABR didn't get exactly what they want. And I'm sure it's very clear that the neighbors also didn't get exactly what they wanted. But I will say, and I tried not to do this because I was mindful of our role here on council. We're not the ones reviewing the material selection or the siting of the buildings, but ultimately we are the approval body. And I dug a little bit into the lot. I drove by it this weekend. I felt like I was back on planning commissions. That's the kind of stuff I used to do. Took a look at it. And then I kind of dug into the lot as it is today. It's got about 60 feet of frontage on Donald. It's got about 75 feet of frontage on Thoreau. So right there, without any zoning variances, you could create two buildable lots. It's R2 zoning. You could get 2 units on it. We now have ADUs, so you can get another unit in the back. So without any zoning variance whatsoever, you could get 6 units on the property. But you would not get a connection sidewalk because they would not have any reason to do that because they wouldn't need any zoning variances to do that. A typical lot in this neighborhood is about 4,800 square foot, which is about, I think, a 40-foot frontage and about 115, 120 feet back. This lot would fit about 12 of those typical lots in it. So I'm just going through some of those machinations to show that this is an irregularly shaped lot. If you look at the plan unit development code and kind of what it talks about, is it's a flexible structure to allow creative infill development in a community that doesn't have many regularly shaped lots left. That is the end of my soliloquy, but I open it up to members of, and I'll take public comment as well, but members of the committee first and then general counsel after that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I just want to, thanks for the work to the going over there, and I did the same thing this weekend. My vote for defer was never about the site plan or any of those things. It was procedural issues that I wanted to have some firmer answers on and to try to get a little bit more buffering for the residents. So we had a week. I think we made that happen. So I'm much more comfortable now voting to send this back to full council.
Councilwoman Bullock.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, I'd actually like to defer to Councilwoman Marks, who I think did a lot of really strong work as the Ward 4 Council representative. I have a couple questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilman Baker. I would just like to say that I've spent time with some of the residents on Thoreau and listened to what some of their concerns are. And I had an opportunity to meet with the architect on Friday, and I think that we've reached a resolution that will help with Mr. Kermode's concerns about some privacy issues. And I'm very grateful for the developer to work with Mr. Kermode and make that a possibility, because I do think the housing is important to the city of Lakewood. And I think whenever we're moving forward and putting something in anyone's backyard, there's always concerns about what it'll look like and how it will affect the neighborhood. I do think that this development, though, is going to be a lovely development. It's not going to be low-end housing. It's going to be a nice development, and hopefully with the tree plantings that are agreed upon, it will make a big difference. And I do appreciate Mr. Kermode and Ben for really bringing me into the conversation and including me in their concerns so I could help wherever I could. So I appreciate that. When you as a resident come forward and share your concerns, then, you know, we can hopefully do something, even though it's not what you really want, but it's a good compromise. So I thank you for really participating and for caring so much about the city of Lakewood, like we all do. So thank you for that.
Any other comments from members of council? Tom, I can go to public comment, or you can talk, whatever you want to do.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. What I guess I'm curious as to whether the developer and the neighbors have any information they can share about potential informal discussions related to working through the issue. One of the primary issues we spoke about, which was that there'd be some agreement about enhanced plantings so that the transition in character would be better buffered, managed, whatever the term would be. So do we, you know, maybe that's a question for Director Byington. Do we have any, or Councilwoman Marks, do we have any information that we're able to learn?
Thanks, Councilman Blick. I can tell you that, yes, that the resident and the developer have been in communication, and they're working on a resolution. I don't believe it's finalized yet. Is that correct? Mr. Began, do you know if it's been finalized yet? I mean, I haven't talked to the developer at all.
Yeah, but name and record, or name and address for the record. I feel like we should, you know, do it the right way, so go ahead.
Perfectly fine, and now that I know how to turn the microphone on, I got Paul Began, Began Architectural Design, 15703 Madison. Yeah, I let Mr. Kermode talk about that as well, too. I know that he and the developer have been in communications, and they're working towards some type of amicable resolution for additional plantings or screening as it needs to be. I'm not aware of anything that's been finalized yet, no.
Mr. Kermode, how you doing? Name and address for the record,
Yes,
please.
Dave Kermode, 1286 Thoreau, and just to echo, Mr. Began's comments, not final, but seems productive, and I don't get the impression that lines of communication will drop or anything. So feeling optimistic. So yeah, I think good there. Thanks.
Thank you.
I know we have the chair of the Planning Commission here as well. Is there any comments you'd like to make, Mr. McDermott?
Good evening, committee members. Thanks as always for your service. I'm Sean McDermott, Chair of the Planning Commission, 1490 Arthur Avenue. Just a few quick notes, and I think it's recognized in how close, in fact, it sounds like there is a resolution here. Planning Commission took this application very seriously, given the fact that it is a planned development. It's a flexible tool that allows a developer to fit a project into our vision. And we saw here a way that with the private property rights that the developer has, we felt that they were able to accomplish the goals of the planned development, Chapter 1156. Per your appointments, we've got volunteers on Planning Commission who are engineers, real estate developers, home builders, zoning experts, and there are times when we do have a split vote. This was not one of those times. So this was a unanimous vote, both in the preliminary and the final versions of the plan development, to then forward the process on to Architecture Board of Review. And again, happy to answer any questions you have about the procedure that we went through. And we feel very confident now with where it is sitting in front of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Any questions for him? Councilperson Strebeck?
Thank you. I did have a question. I was able to actually drive over there and have a look around right before this meeting. And it's interesting to me that along the path to Cove Park that's already there, that's on the other side of the road, there's a beautiful chain link fence. And in none of the drawings that I've seen for this project have I seen any kind of a fence between the railroad and the yard, and that is very concerning to me from a safety point of view. Things coming off of trains, granted, if they're traveling really fast, no fence is going to stop them. But even from that path, dogs running, children escaping, people that are walking there, I would feel much, much more comfortable if there was at least, at the very minimum, a chain link fence that matched the chain link fence that is currently on the property at Cove. Thank you.
Thank you. I've suggested to the administration, because we had some of those discussions, that this plat will have an easement to the city for the sidewalk. Is that correct, Director Byington? She's nodding her head yes for the record. Sorry. And so I've suggested that the city put in there that the city have the right to put a fence up, should one be necessary, to allow for that. Is that, will the administration take that suggestion?
Thank you, Councilman Baker. We have not had a chance to talk to the developer to see if that would be acceptable, but that is something that we could do if council ultimately would like us to. Just have the language in there that would give the city the option at some point to install fencing if it were deemed to be necessary for safety measures.
Thank you. I feel like we're rounding towards resolution, and so, Mr. Bullock, yeah, go ahead.
I got a question or two. So, thank you for the thoughtful discussion here. A couple things. There's three substantive issues, and we've worked through, I think, most of them or all of them, but I'd like to at least get on the record a little clarification. That's part one. Part two is just the process. So I'm sensitive to the fact that there's different roles for the Planning Commission, the Architecture Board of Review, and the City Council. In this plan development process, all three of us are present. And so I don't think it should be a surprise to all of us, meaning the city and the community, if City Council, which is comprised of elected officials who our primary job is respond to members of the public, view these same mix of issues a little differently than the appointed bodies, who are typically staffed by professionals in architecture and planning and law and so forth. So I detect a little bit of a kerfuffle from all of us that, oh geez, City Council is doing something off script here, even though this is only our third or fourth or fifth plan development. So I'm not sure the norm has been fully established. I guess I'd like to underscore that because it's a plan development, not a use by right, it is not unsurprising if City Council members are trying to do their level best to be responsive to the public. And so two of the questions I'd like to ask are responsive to some of the email communication that we got from the public. I think that the members of the community probably communicated those same sentiments to the previous boards and commissions, and they did their work to work through those. But City Council is kind of coming in at the end, and as we've discussed before, if the current ordinance for the plan development process gives City Council a yes or a no, but not a in between, then if the administration doesn't want council to say no, we got to have the wherewithal to be thoughtful in our deliberations and have the chance to be responsive to the public earlier in the process, rather than, the council president was gracious to call a special meeting tonight so that we have the opportunity to be on schedule. So I don't mean that as a casting aspersions or negative, because I know a lot of people work very hard. I think the planning commission, the planning staff, all of you work 250%. You work 100 hours a week, it seems to me. So I'm just observing that in kind of the growing pains of using the plan development process, these kinds of things may come up in the future. And the appointed officials have a different role. And so maybe they opt towards property rights, the developer's investment, and so forth. So anyway, that's my kind of meta observations. What I'd like to, so the three issues are buffering, which I think we've been mostly talking about, just further strengthening what the developer already had agreed to, and we appreciate that. The developer added 5 or 6 feet and some plantings. The goal is to get those larger to provide more screening, more transition. And so that's not something council is attempting to legislate, but we're glad to hear that the parties are on their way towards a mutual agreement there. And I really hope and encourage that to happen, because I think in the spirit of our deliberation in the vote tonight, that at least for me, I'm trying to, see additional improvements. But we take you at your word, the parties at their word, that we're on our way. The second issue is traffic and parking impacts, which was a top concern from the residents. I suspect that the boards and commissions have put a lot of thought into that. I guess I'd like for the record tonight to understand what measures were included, why the approved plan is anticipated to be successful, but most importantly, if for some reason a year or 3 in we find that the traffic and parking impacts are worse or more intensive than expected, what measures might the city commit to take to be, to address or balance that in the future? That would not be a site plan change at that point. That would be city management of the public right-of-way. And then the third thing would be, because the developer, I think, has gone above and beyond in committing funds without, by the way, a tax abatement, as far as I understand, to build that public access pathway out of the developer's own pocket and including maintenance. I think that the city should meet them halfway on our dime on the public right-of-way, make sure that we have really strong connections, safe, high quality. These are not my ideas, but the neighbors have been pointing this out as well. If we're going to get a private actor to put out a very nice thing, then let's make sure that the city is meeting them at that same level. So I wasn't clear from our last discussion. I guess there was some question about whether Public Works Department thought it could do something on I think it was the west side, but from my perspective, that should be a slam dunk. We should be, if we're creating the first leg of a trail, let's make sure that connects, especially to the park that's nearby, successfully and safely and all the rest. In the city, that's in our goals anyway, right? So let's double down on that positive idea there out of the cities. And so that I talked too long, but so maybe, I guess, if Director Byington, if you're willing, could you address the traffic and parking impacts, and what's our backup plan if we experience higher impacts than we anticipate?
Thank you, Councilman Bullock. Well, I will defer to the general update regarding the traffic. As you could recall, Assistant Director Boss went through that at the last meeting. He could recap that information, but that was fully vetted, and he can provide an update. I can't speak personally to what the city would do in regard to if there's issues in the future, how they would handle them. We will be talking with Public Works in regard to the connections, across the intersections to Cove, and to see what we can do on that end. But I don't have anything, any sort of statements back from Public Works. We haven't had a chance to talk on that yet. But at this point, I'll defer it to Assistant Director Boss in regard to the traffic and parking.
Councilman, so in the slides from last week, I covered the traffic impact trip generation memo that was provided by TMS engineers in support of the development, as well as the data, the Thoreau traffic data that we collected in October and early November in comparison to our neighborhood traffic calming program averages for about the 60 streets that we've done over the last 2 years. So in terms of parking, the development itself right now would be building 254% of the parking requirement. So there are 11 units. The minimum requirement is 1 off-street parking space per unit in a garage. Each unit has a 2-car garage, so that's 22 spaces, and then there are 6 additional overflow spaces on the western side. So that's a total of 28 above and beyond a requirement, a minimum requirement of 11. So under normal zoning, they would require an exception to the maximum in terms of their consideration. So they are, per our parking code and legislation, they are well parked for a residential development. In terms of the trip generation, the TMS engineers predicted, based on the single-family housing and a multifamily housing development, they predicted an addition of 27 weekday AM peak trips and 26 weekday PM trips. So roughly 27 trips in the morning, 27 trips at night. So if you consider those trips in and out, in the consideration of the actual traffic data that we collected for Thoreau, an average daily traffic of 516 cars per day, you're going from 516 roughly up to 540, 550 or something. 600 is our threshold for traffic calming. So even with the additional trip generation from this development, they would still be underneath the threshold minimum, the minimum threshold for consideration of traffic calming. And that's assuming that the average speed, 85th percentile, and excessive speeding metrics met those minimum thresholds, which they were, well, the average speed on Thoreau was 19.4 miles an hour. The 85th percentile speed was 24.8, so just at the limit, which is exactly where you want the 85th percentile to be. 85th percentile was one of the main metrics used to determine the speed limits. And they had a 0.33% of volume that was recorded at 35 miles an hour or higher. So our thresholds there for 85th percentile for traffic calming would be 30 miles an hour, so they were 5 miles an hour under that. And our threshold for excessive speeding is 5% of total volume. So they were 4.67 percentage points underneath that. So in terms of all of the streets that we have looked at in terms of traffic calming or traffic issues, in terms of streets that have been nominated and problematic, Thoreau falls at about the, like your kid's grades, about the 40th or 50th percentile in terms of consideration. If 100% is the bad streets that we target for traffic calming, they are well below that. That's just objective data that we collected on Thoreau. So I showed a map last time of the ODOT TIMS accident report information for the last 10 years, and there wasn't a single accident reported into TIMS on either Donald or Thoreau. All of the accidents within a block radius were all at the intersection of Cohasset and Detroit, where everybody turns into Garfield and apparently hits each other. So that's just the overview, kind of repeating what I had covered last week in terms of traffic and parking impacts.
Thank you. Anything else, Councilman Bullock?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I recognize that you covered that last time. It's helpful to triple check, hear it again, and also in response to some of the feedback we've gotten from the public. Mayor, since the police chief isn't here, if for some reason in future years the traffic volume or speeds impact were higher than what Mr. Boss just laid out, would the administration be willing to take whatever appropriate measures there would be to provide relief from those traffic impacts if that comes to pass in the future?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Council President Keppel.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to a couple things. One, and also just thank my colleagues up here for taking this week to really do the work to be responsive and educate ourselves. So thank you all for really doing that. So we were prepared tonight, and a lot of good collaborative work. So thank you. Thanks to the developer and residents for also being part of that collaboration process. So this is how these things are supposed to work, is that we're taking time to hear and work together. And then also to Councilman Bullock's point about process a little bit. This is something Director Byington and I have talked, and Assistant Director Boss a little bit about too, is because this plan development process has been kind of new and a lot for all of us, and we had a sort of trial by fire with downtown development. We've learned a lot with that, and I think we'll be kind of looking at how that ordinance is set up and see if we can, because to the point of everyone has put in a lot of work on these developments, particularly, the planning department. So this isn't a personnel issue. This is a process issue that we can make it smoother for everybody to give us all time to breathe and digest it. So kind of the same thing with downtown development. We had a plethora of meetings so that we had time to consume all of that information. And I also want to thank the developer for being flexible with us. Two, this could have come to us in the middle of all the downtown development, and everyone, both they and the planning department, were kind enough to give us a little breathing room to get through one before we started this one. So that all worked out well. So we have the extra week this week and the meeting tonight. So just want to thank everyone for their flexibility and understanding, and that we'll be taking a look at that process to see if we can make things a little smoother and give council a little more runway to be familiar with these projects. So thanks.
Yes, thank you, Council President Keppel. And I know in looking, I did a deep dive in the ordinance as well, and we have the ability to change the ordinance. I know, and perhaps it's just because of my previous service on Planning Commission, I was pretty familiar with the process. So whenever I see PUD on a Planning Commission docket item, I know that it's eventually going to come to us, so I try to pay a little more attention to it. Maybe there's some notice tweaks we can make in the ordinance that requires, once it goes to Planning Commission, at least a notice goes to council so we're aware of it. And furthermore, it just gives us the nuclear button in the code, yes or no. Perhaps there's a tweaking ability that the code could give us. So I do think that there are ways to make it better, and this has illuminated that, and thanks everyone for their patience with it. And I'll say that, I, in reading and love resident feedback. In fact, I knew a lot of the people personally that live in the neighborhood that provided their feedback over the weekend. And it's a challenge when you're dealing with land use changes near your home. And this is something we saw on Planning Commission when I was on Planning Commission. It seemed to be there's a choice between the property would stay vacant or be developed. And to me, I think you have to intermix the property right of the person who owns the property or the entity that owns the property and their ability to do what is allowed in the code. And that's where the challenge comes, I think. And I do want to be mindful that, while we have great input from the community and they've expressed their concerns, this developer owns the property, they will buy it eventually, and they have the right to do what's permissible within the code on it. And they are providing, this pathway will get you all the way from Manor Park over to Cove Park. That's meaningful for the community. So there is a public benefit coming out of it. It may not be exactly what the neighbors want, but there is something there. And we have to be mindful of private property rights as well. But it's a tough issue. You're changing the land use next to someone's home. Any other public comment? At this point, I would entertain a motion. Or I will make a motion. I'll make a motion to favorably refer ordinance, let me get it right. Ordinance 38, 2024 to full council for approval. There's been a motion, a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. There's no opposed. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
And then we can actually go right into full council unless, Danielle, Do we need to switch the video, or can we just stay on this video feed? Just stay on? Okay. Okay. All right, so we can just go right into our special meeting of Lakewood City Council. Call the meeting to order, and I'll just go ahead and do a roll call myself. So Evans? Here. Marks? Keppel here. Baker? Here. Bullock?
Here.
Shebig? Here. Steiner, Hamilton Steiner. All right, so we're all here. And with that, we have one item on the docket, which is Ordinance 38, 2024, which has been favorably referred out of committee. Does the chair wish to make any comments about it? We were all here just now, so.
No comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with that, I'll make a motion to adopt Ordinance 38, 2024.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And that motion passes. All right. And no further business before council. Without objection, we're adjourned.
That's fine. I will, I got the easement language. Where's where? I will send Paul the easement, proposed easement language.